Hello, I'm William Stewart. Welcome back to our verse-by-verse study on the book of Galatians. Welcome. We're in chapter 3, just a profound chapter, and it's worth your time to explore it. It helps explain Christ's mission and the very basis of our salvation. You remember from prior episodes that Paul was admonishing the Galatians for forgetting their faith and adhering to legalism, probably specifically Jewish legalism, the law, to live their Christian faith after accepting Christ by faith alone, which we do to become believers in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So he then, after stating, you begin in faith, and yet you've abandoned it, he begins his argument to them that their faith, their saving faith, and thus their whole Christian life is not based out of the law, the covenant with Moses from back in Exodus. It goes back further to Abraham, and that Abraham believed God in his promises to him, which included salvation. And as a sign of this promise, his son Isaac, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. In Genesis 15:6, a very important verse. God considered his faith as righteous and Abraham righteous. And thus the promise of salvation came out of Abraham. So he explores this further in verses 7 through 9 today in chapter 3. Verse 7, know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are children of Abraham. So it's saying that those who have believed on Christ and his mission are the children of Abraham. And Paul makes a point in Romans 9 that the Jews they all consider themselves Abraham's children. And this is said in the Gospels as well. Paul says at the first a few verses, about verse 6 or 7, that the true children of Abraham are Christians who have believed by faith in the Messiah that was promised back in Genesis 12, which we'll come to in a minute. So true Christians have believed by faith, and so he's reminding them that's the basis of their faith. This is critical. Salvation is not from the law. Many people believe if they somehow obeyed the law, they would be righteous enough before God. No, because we're still depraved. We're fallen from Adam's sin in the Garden of Eden, the whole human race. So as 1 Corinthians 15:17 says, we could be forgiven of sins, we could, and by implication, act righteously by the law, do the law, yet we would still be full of sin and not presentable to a righteous God because of that depravity, which is what the resurrection, the regeneration, dealt with, that issue, that we could be considered righteous like Abraham. So he was considered righteous. Looking ahead to that promise, we're considered righteous looking back at that promise of Christ. Verse 8, and through Scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the heathen, the Gentiles, through faith, preached before the gospel to Abraham, saying, in thee all nations should be blessed. So this is from Genesis 12, verse 3. So remember last week we said there were three basic promises to Abraham, part of the Abrahamic covenant, that he would have a son, which I think was a sign that the other two promises would be completed. He would be father of a great nation, which is Israel, which would give Messiah. As well, all nations of the world would be blessed, Gentile and Jew, through Messiah, otherwise salvation. So verse 9, so then they which be of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. Okay, key verses. What have we learned? That, again, salvation is based in the Abrahamic covenant, not the Mosaic covenant. The Mosaic covenant was not there for salvation. It was to give a rule of life, to develop a people, a country, Israel, and to order them both in law and worship, as well as to teach about Messiah. And when Messiah came, the law became inactive because it was fulfilled. Messiah came. However, salvation goes back further to Abraham, where salvation is promised through Abraham, through the Abrahamic covenant. And Abraham believed this, so he was considered righteous, as we are considered righteous through faith, as we believe in Messiah, and he believed in the coming Messiah. All right, good lesson. It clears up a lot about the law, and knowing from where our salvation originally came in terms of Scripture. Of course, God planned this ahead of time, as we know that He chose us before the foundation of the world. So, but that's another story for another time. Thank you for joining me today. Come back next time. We'll continue this really great conversation about the nature of our salvation and its foundations. It's faith strengthening. I'll see you then.